Well, welcome to the first Sunday of the Christian Church's New Year. It's the first Sunday of Advent, Hope Sunday. And for those who feel as if they are just barely hanging on to nothing but a thread of their faith, hope seems an ideal starting place for the new year. Who among us couldn't benefit from a healthy dose of hope? Because for many of us, the needle of our hope meter has been sitting in the red zone for a while, the zone that's labeled hopeless. The news headlines aren't helpful. Global climate crisis reaches tipping point. Experts warn of dire consequences. Record numbers of refugees flee conflict and persecution. Youth suicide rates reach alarming highs, raising urgent concerns. Our own worlds, overflowing with personal worries and tragedies, add to our headline-induced anxiety. A cancer diagnosis that keeps managing to crowd out the life-giving things of your day. A routine surgery that nonetheless fills you with worry and dread. Age-related body limitations, which shouldn't surprise you, but do anyway. So when I turn to this morning's gospel reading, anticipating it might offer some words of hope and consolation on this Hope Sunday, I was disappointed. It opens with the words of warning instead of hope. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. It continues in this vein until its closing words. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place. Well, since this wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, I turned to the assigned reading from the Hebrew Bible, the words of the prophet Jeremiah, which sounded more to my liking. They are words of promise of days of a hopeful future. The days are surely coming, says God. And it goes on to say, in those days, a righteous branch will spring up and will execute justice and righteousness and safety. Now, this is more like it. But I can't forget that Jeremiah's words were born out of tears. Jerusalem had been under siege for a year and a half. For a year and a half, the armies of its enemies had surrounded it, cutting off its food supplies. It was nothing less than the slow suffocation of a city. There was no way to eat, and there was no hope of surviving. It turned people into monsters who did things that we dare not think about. Jeremiah had warned the people this would happen. He really had. He had persisted with his warnings even when other prophets had been executed for saying the kinds of things he was saying. And now he was locked away by order of the king, and there was little hope that he would make it out alive. The situation was beyond hope when Jeremiah heard this morning's words of the prophecy that we Christians so often associate with hope and joy. Words that kick off the season of Advent and the new church year. The earliest Christians would have grabbed hold of these words, saying these words of Jeremiah were talking about the reign of God. And they would have pointed to Jesus as the righteous branch springing up from the lineage of David. Jesus is our hope, they would have said. And so do we today. But this morning's text is not pie-in-the-sky words of platitude like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and everything happens for a reason. It's not meant to smooth over or deny the pain of the current situation. The hope of which Jeremiah writes is not wishful thinking. Jeremiah's hope happens even while he weeps. He holds both his pain and his hope together. He doesn't deny his suffering, but instead reminds us that sometimes all we can do is to acknowledge how wrong and unfair things seem and weep with one another while at the same time holding on to hope. Henry Nouwen once said, "Hope is not dependent on peace in the land, justice in the world, and success in the business. Hope is willing to leave unanswered questions unanswered and unknown futures unknown. Hope makes you see God's guiding hand not only in the gentle and pleasant moments, but also in the shadows of disappointment and darkness." Rather than a belief that everything will work out in the end, hope, it seems then, is the thing that enables us to believe in the inworking goodness of a benevolent God, even as we look upon a universe in which every trace of God seems to have vanished. And when the church is operating as it's meant to operate, then it provides a model for hope. MCC churches are an example. They were born out of tears in 1968 at a time when the LGBT community was being harassed by the police, when homosexuality was criminalized, and when it was classified as a mental disorder. Out of all that, MCC rose up as a bastion of hope, proclaiming LGBT people as made in the image of God. And once again in the 1980s and 90s, during the AIDS crisis, MCC offered hope in the form of spiritual care and emotional support to people affected by AIDS, and by providing education about HIV/AIDS, and by advocating for the rights and needs of those living with HIV/AIDS. MCC churches have been a model for hope even in the midst of the tears of their day, and we continue to be. We continue to hold out hope for the future when all evidence is to the contrary. That's the kind of hope which Jeremiah speaks of in this morning's text. The kind of hope that doesn't back down even when all seems lost. And that's the kind of hope in which God continues to call us. Kate Bowler is an author and podcaster who has experienced cancer multiple times in her life. She was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer at age 35 when she was married with a baby son and working as a Duke University professor. She was given a prognosis of only 2 years to live. However, at least for today, she has been declared cancer-free. Kate has this to say about hope. I used to feel ambivalent about hope. I didn't know how to feel hopeful when my reality felt bleak. Hope is too often conflated with empty optimism. But Christian hope is like an anchor that God tosses way out into the future and reels us toward it, pulling us from the ache and drawing us all toward beauty and restoration and brightness. This reminds us that we really are going somewhere. An anchor that God tosses way into the future and reels us toward it, reminding us that we really are going somewhere. That probably says it better than I ever could or did with this morning's ramblings. So don't let go of hope. And if you can, be the hope for someone else. someone who is looking for that anchor in their own world of chaos, and trust in the hope that God gives us through the person of Jesus Christ, who showed up one day as a helpless baby born under seemingly hopeless circumstances. Amen.